Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you and welcome again to this next edition of the ManagementOS Podcast. As you all know, we're always talking about AI, technology, and one of the big topics is always, and why Brent is here, we're talking about how leaders scale profitably. How do you do this without chaos and burnout? I used to think that that was just the price of leadership, the price of being an entrepreneur, the price of being a leader, but it doesn't have to be that way. So we have our guest here today, Brent Hagan. He spent years operating at intersection, quite literally at growth and leadership and real world execution, gone through personal transformation of his own. We'll get into that story as well. And at the end of the day, it's like we'll get into a little bit of how success sometimes leads to overwhelm, but how having intentional systems can really change everything, all the way from your operations to people, your health, your relationship. And at the end of the day, why does everybody do what they do? Is they want to have some means to have some freedom and some clarity and impact, and that's what we'll get into today. So Brent, thank you so much for being here today.
I really appreciate you having me. Thanks. I hope everyone listening had a great holiday.
For sure. And yeah, we're recording this January 2026. For those of you who are more visual learners, we'll be on YouTube as well. You'll get the link in the show notes. And if not, you can always listen to us on your drive or workout or wherever you're doing. So the first part, we'll kind of talk a little bit about your, I guess, your leadership inflection point, if you will. Can you take us back? Take us back a little bit. Like, what did growth look like in your early leadership years? And then what did you realize, when your success was creating more complexity, not less? Like, can you take us back a little bit through your journey?
Sure, absolutely. As an operations person at heart, and somebody who spent most of my career managing manufacturing and fulfillment operations, I think oftentimes we're judged on what do we get done and how fast do we get it done. Right.
Mhm.
As you grow, and you move up in organizations, that very rarely becomes the thing, right? It's going to be how do you manage through others. So early on, growth really stopped being about like how do you add volume, and starts really becoming about structural change. The first time that I truly felt that shift was when I was in private equity, and I was leading major network consolidations. We started moving a site in particular. It was 50 years old, and it was a 50-year-old business. It had been a single site. And I began looking at how do we shift away from the singular business? And we were acquiring a lot of different businesses at the same time. And how do we start consolidating based on manufacturing efficiency and pairing like SKUs with like SKUs, regardless of what book of business they had historically come from, and focus on what the core value of that business was, again to drive cost efficiencies. Operationally, it was a huge win. We unlocked major manufacturing efficiencies. We improved asset utilization, expanded throughput, and really built a really strong business out of it. But the next thing that happened as a result of that is revenue recognition became more complex. Forecasting really wasn't simple anymore because we were navigating multiple books of business across the same equipment structure. Um, Customer contracts no longer align cleanly with our operational realities. So our lead times changed, cost accounting changed, quality ownership changed. But then the most complex piece was our labor dynamics. We had a union contract at one of the facilities with a clause that stated if a specific book of business dropped below 20% of total site revenue within a full year, the contract would be null and void. So you can kind of guess how the unions felt about that, knowing what that language was. So as we were
Mhm.
consolidating volume into that site across a broader books of business, the union recognized that shift instantly. And so
Yes.
so we had a contract renewal that was coming up in a year. So their first move was to demand that we immediately open up negotiations. So now you're introducing legal complexities, financial complexities, political complexity. That was really never in our plan. And at the end of the day, like nothing went wrong. Like everything we had executed, it had gone incredibly right. But it required a very complex system in order to manage all this and make the full thing a win.
And I think that's what, a lot of times people say, oh, I want to have $1 million business or get to a certain size or whatnot. And I think to your point, you can have successes at multiple levels, but the pressure and noise that happens, the bigger you get, to your point, everything can go right, but you can still have incredible demands
Oh,
on
absolutely.
on your brain, on your body. And I think, you know, like, what do you have any early signs that things were starting to feel heavier or harder to manage, like from a physiological standpoint, when you were going through this journey, sort of like everything's going well in the business. Now, to your point, yeah, labor contracts, and because I've been through those two as well, and boy, those are not on a list of fun things that you want to do in a career. If you can avoid that in a career, maybe a good thing.
Yeah.
But um, it's great when you come out the other end, maybe, but they could be difficult. And I've seen it take a toll on bodies, like literally our bodies, and it's
Oh
happened to
yeah.
me in the past. So, did you see that? How did that manifest within you, or did it?
For sure. I'm a highly reflective individual, and I like to operate fast, so I can start to feel that pressure pretty quickly. The first warning sign for me usually isn't within my performance, right? Because like I'll keep pushing um, until the job is done, but it's really within the cognitive load itself. Especially one interesting part for me is I'll start dreaming about work, and that's when I know that it's too much. If if I'm not dreaming about my illustrious high school football career or winning $1 billion or something like that, and it's about what problem didn't I solve yesterday, like that's when I know that it's a real issue for me. But the decisions, they used to be really obvious, but now they require like alignment from five teams a lot of times, and solving one problem quietly creates two more downstream. And so what I begin to recognize is when my calendar is just overrun across multiple functions, and I feel this pressure of misalignment. It becomes like a weight on my shoulders, and it becomes a total distraction for me. And if even joining those meetings feels like cumbersome, or I see myself like not wanting to open that email or not wanting to respond to that email, like I know I need to take a step back, and have more of a systems approach versus like, hey, like let's just try to bear through this.
Sure. Actually, it's really interesting what you said, because most people are probably not as reflective as you suggest, as you are, sorry. But if you pay attention to your dreams, your body, your sleep pattern, there's no way that cognitive load doesn't bother us. All of us have the same 24 hours a day. We're
Mhm.
all sort of Homo sapien. We sort of need some basic nutrition, sleep, and exercise. Like there are some, universal laws. There aren't too many people. I mean, I don't know him at all, but I hear Elon Musk, sleeps 3, 4 hours a day and works the rest of it. And I don't know how he hasn't fallen apart. Maybe he is, I don't know. But from the outside, it's like he kind of super genetics almost, or like a Michael Phelps. Some people have the genes where they can process oxygen. Like those are, the exception and not the rarity. I think it's really important that you said that. I think what I like that you said is just making, I guess what the audience should take away is think about being self-reflective. Because I know in the past, I'm like you, I will just keep barreling down and getting the job done, but not realizing the wake that I caused in my past. I'll share one quick story. When my daughter, I was working at an organization, and tie pressure was going well, but I just had a boss that I didn't see eye to eye with as a direct report. Good friends today, reporting to not so much. At the time, I realized that pressure manifested itself with me snapping at my 2-year-old. And it happened at the dinner table. It still bothers me now, so many years later, but it was like, whoa, what just happened? Right? Like I let the pressure and those dynamics get to my kitchen table. And I sort of snapped at a 2-year-old, sort of like, like that. And we all do that, but I did it in a very unproud way. And it was really an inflection point. And he said, okay, that never happened, and that will never happen again. And for me, that was, about 15 years ago. I was an executive in a large corp, and I said, "Oh, that can't happen again because that is not, who I am and who I think leaders should be." So I think you have to be reflective, which I love that you said that because we will create a wake, and I think it needs to be with intention. And sometimes we can do that. It'll harm us, or it'll harm us around us. And sometimes it's really hard to see that impact. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but that's one story for me when that pressure has allowed to create a bad wake in other areas, right?
Oh, for sure. One of the things I appreciate about our CEO, my boss here, actually, when I was onboarding, he asked me like, "What are triggers when I know something's not going well with you or when stressed out?" And for me, it's you'll see it on my face kind of right away. Like I'm very short tempered. When in all reality, like I like to joke around in meetings, take long digressions to just bring people back, especially in a virtual environment, to the point that we're all people and find commonality. When everything with me just becomes transactional, and I'm like, great, what do you need? Okay, I agree or disagree or whatever, and now I move on to the next thing. Like there's probably something going wrong. But then I don't know how Elon does it to your point with his 11 kids or whatever however many he has these
Yeah,
days. But it wasn't as easy as it was for me, 10 years ago when it was just me or when it was just me and my wife, and I could come home, get a workout with her, take her out to dinner, and then just go to bed, right? Like you have these little things that want your time and attention and deserve that.
yeah,
And so what are you doing to end your day mentally? And I think for me personally, there has to be a trigger there to say like, for now, my day is over and my girls get a certain amount of my time and it's just focused on them. In fact, I'll even give you an example. This is less about triggers, but something that's important for me. My team, my boss, my peers, they know when we're out on the road. I made a commitment to my 8-year old a long time ago, longer than she can even remember, that when I'm traveling, and I've traveled significantly for most of her life, when she calls to say goodnight, whatever else is going on around me, it's over. Like it's all about her. I've been at baseball games with my team before, and I've walked out of the stadium. I've been at dinners before. I'm at dinners a lot usually is when it's happening, and she'll call to say goodnight, and I'll be like, "Hey guys, like I'm gonna go." And if she wants
yeah,
5 minutes outside, she's got five. If she wants 15 to talk to me about her day, she's got that too. And I'll come back. I'll come back when I come back. And
yeah.
so much of that is about her, but a lot of it's about me to be able to also decompress and say like, there's a lot more going on than just what problem you're solving at work. And so
Sure.
that sort of time is important too.
I love that you said that because as I follow that rule today, I actually got in trouble from in my last role, the CEO. With the sales guys, we were out in the West and having dinner. Kids were younger. I got in trouble for going out to say goodnight to my kid. Took 5 minutes, and I had pre-warned the table. Said, "Hey guys and gals, my kids are young. They're gonna call. I don't know when they'll call after bath, all that sort of stuff." And my boss, had the gall to give me trouble, and I was just like. Okay. So I didn't listen to it because I'm like, well, with people I have relationship with, even if I didn't, I'll say that I'm expecting a call from the kids. So I appreciate that you do that. And I learned from that moment on, kids need us as dads, as moms, whether you said 5 or 15 minutes, I think that is really important. And even now, I'll be in the middle or even the board meeting. I'll just say the kids might call me because they've got something going on. So I've actually stopped in a board meeting to take calls from them. Some people might say you're crazy, um, but I'm not because, or I don't think I am, because at the end of the day, they're going to be there for me and I need to be there for them. And it's just 5 minutes, 10 minutes won't completely change what's happening. And at the end of the day, they quite literally are the future. So it's a rule. So I appreciate that you said that because I think it is important. Um, yeah. So, I don't miss any more calls anymore. So I think that's really great that you do that.
No, I
Uh,
agree. I totally agree.
yeah, I think it's a good tip. And if someone doesn't like it, then they're not your people,
Yeah,
right? I know
that's
that
absolutely
boss
right.
was not my people. That's like, Yeah, that you're not, I will not die on a hill for you, but I will for others, but I would not for that person, right? And so I'm no longer there. But hey, that's just how life goes, and it's a two-way street. So I'll kind of step into this other area around sort of leadership and bottlenecks. Like, do you have any thoughts on why so many capable leaders unknowingly sort of all of a sudden become the biggest bottleneck in their organization? Is it, what are your thoughts? I've got some thoughts on it because it's happened to me, but I would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I had touched on it just a few minutes ago, actually, a little bit.
Yeah.
A lot of it, I think, is because the traits that create early success quietly sabotage scale. Really, in particular, in operators, high performers become trusted, reliable, and frankly, like indispensable resources. And that happens until their bandwidth. The company ceiling has been defined by this person's bandwidth, and from the inside, like the individual that it's happening to, it feels like responsibility when really what it is a constraint, and so I call it kind of like a systematic failure is really what happens, and so a person takes on more responsibility. Not that they're not capable of doing it, but to your point, there's only 24 hours in a day. And so it comes to the point where every decision's being made by them, whether that's directly or indirectly, and that just can't happen. And so
Yeah.
the company ceiling is now defined by that person.
I love that you said about the traits and responsibility and confusion there. Like in your experience, what do you think is harder to let go of, sort of the task, the decisions, or identity, because it's sort of like that sense of responsibility. And like if there's something that you think that, you feel that from what you see, it's hard for people harder to let go of.
Yeah, I think it's identity. Honestly, in my mind, it's probably not even close. Letting go of a task is uncomfortable for sure. Letting go of decisions can feel risky. I can talk about that probably later as well. But letting go of your identity it feels almost destabilizing when your career is built on being the
Yeah.
fixer or the expert, the one people rely on. Your sense of value becomes inherently tied to your level of involvement. So as leadership evolves, you're no longer measured by what you personally execute. You're measured by what you enable. And I touched on that a little bit um,
Hmm.
before talking about the level of scale of decision making. And so I think that transition is probably one of the hardest, but it's also one of the most important in your career, right? How are you enabling those around you to make decisions that you agree with and that are going to drive the business forward? Like that sort of empowerment is critical, but it also oftentimes requires a change in your identity as a leader too.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think it's in that order: identity, decisions, and task, in terms of priority, because people sometimes have a hard time delegating, but why? And it's exactly what you said. It's sort of this whole identity piece. At the end of the day, um, there's a guy by the name. Have you ever heard of Todd Herman? Did we talk about this before? Todd Herman and the ego. So Todd
No.
Herman has. I got my book somewhere around here. So Todd Herman has a book called Personality. No, that's Benjamin Hardy. Todd Herman, the ego, the alter ego effect. You touched on this earlier. So we all have multiple egos. So we all know sort of Kobe Bryant. He goes into the Black Mamba when he went on the field. Like he sort of literally transitions his mind. And so Todd talks about this identity that we have. So for example, for him, when I saw him do a speech, he had these fake glasses on, but that was his physical sign that his identity was changing, that I'm now here. But then when he's at home, he takes those glasses on, he puts on the silly colored band wrist, and he has young kids, and he's like, okay, I'm super dad, right? And so those who have the ability, like a lot in pro sport, they sort of transition their identity, their alter ego, if you will, and they just become, okay, now what? And to your point, I think with the identity pieces, the identity that gets us to a manager, to a director, to a VP, to a CEO, to sort of a PE operator, they're not the same. I'm not the same person that I was 15 years ago when all
Yeah.
these, it can't be, because otherwise, how could I lead the organization I'm leading now? Or same thing with you. And I think that's one of the things I want the audience to take around is that you have to let go who you were and figure out who do I need to become into the next step. And if you're in, and I actually had a podcast with Giovanni Marsico. He's an award-winning Emmy, got like two Emmys, some great stuff. And we talked a little bit about this as well in terms of like if you think you're like you are the athlete and then you are the person that will do those things and you sort of figure out what they call it the future self. I used to think it was a little bit of woo-woo in terms of like what do you mean identity engineering, like what is that? I think that's just a fancy term other to say I got to change my skill set for the next level, and you got to let go
Sure.
with what got you there. So it's what got you there won't keep you there, kind of thing. And I think that's just a more simple way to kind of put it. Yeah, and you talked a little. My next question would be like, how does being needed quietly turn into a leadership trap? And you just answered the question through the process of identity. It's like, well, my team need me to do this, and they don't want to let go, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's validating. Um, it's validating. The more indispensable you become, the more fragile the organization gets, right? Like that's the outcome, the output of that validation for you. So what you really have to look at, and people have to realize is at scale, your job, your goal should be to not be needed, right? It's to make yourself progressively unnecessary.
yes.
I can leave for a week, 2 weeks, whatever at a time, and my team is going to operate. Our cadences aren't going to change. They're probably going to make a decision, maybe some of which I disagree with, but nothing's going to kill the business, and that's what the goal should be. I think oftentimes leaders think like, no, no, I have to insert myself. It's just not the case.
Yeah, 100%. Which kind of gets me to the next talk that I want to talk about because it's around the concept of systems, right? Because if you have good systems, good things can happen. And again, before I took my exec MBA to Jack Welch out of Washington, probably about 10 years ago. And even though at Clorox, we did all this training on Six Sigma and value stream mapping, it didn't click for me until about 8, 9 years ago. Because I think most people think systems, they think government, they think bureaucracy. And, do you have a thought on how you define systems sort of the right way?
Yeah, I think the way that I mean, certainly there is a governing element to that, but systems are the conditions that make the right behavior the easiest behavior. And that's how I really want people to think about that. They do govern how information flows, how decisions are made, what gets measured, and ultimately what do you correct and what do you reinforce? So good systems, the way that I look at it, good systems eliminate friction and make excellence repeatable. That's how I want my teams to think about them.
I love that you said make excellent repeatable. And I think that if you're listening or writing, if you're not driving, don't do it, but write that one down. I think that is a writer downer, as my friend Ryan Dice says. I also think it's really important that you said earlier was to make yourself replaceable, right? Like at the end of the day, the ability to create the vision, the structure, the parameters for people to make decisions. I think it was Tim Ferriss. I know Tim Ferriss talks about the 4 hour work week, which I can't wrap my head around, but because I like what I do. But he said something that I think a way we should think about systems. I would love to see if you agree, but what should be automated? He calls it the AED framework. I think it's his concept, but what should be automated, eliminated, or delegated? And I think based on that, also what gives you energy and takes away energy. So stuff that you love doing and are really good that maybe you should do, but then either automate, delegate, or eliminate the other stuff. And that's kind of the way I approach it is, well, I need my best contribution to the business is to be in my zone of genius. I need to documented, if you will, in terms of a VSM and a playbook. So that
Sure.
if something happens to me, I mean, my wife got sick and kind of disappeared for 2 years, and she came back, right? And so anything can happen to anybody. And so you need to be, I feel that we owe it to the business to do it that way. But yeah, I just want to hear your thoughts on some of those topics.
Um, the way in which I like to approach it is first of all, you had talked about it a little bit, like what is the leader good at, and what gives them energy. I think that's an important element for people to understand. Like, I think right role, right fit. we have to be able to do things pretty consistently that fuel our tank, and keep us energized. And so if I'm building like a leader standard work document or saying like what does my day, my week, my month look like, there has to be elements of that. I think additionally we have to get clear lines of decision making, because any constraint that we add into the business, including if that's myself being the core decision maker, um, we need to be able to create clarity on the outcomes that we're trying to generate. So I want to establish clear ownership. I want to establish clear outcomes. And I want all those tied to very clear principles to what we're trying to achieve. And so when we do that, I think that really begins to all unlock autonomy across the rest of the team. And so some of the processes that I've done before is first, let's start with defining the right decisions. Write down who's going to decide it, who provides what input, and then who needs to be informed, right? And so, kind of an escalation matrix of
Yeah,
um,
like a
and
classic racy model.
yeah, that's exactly right. And so when we do that, like half the noise disappears. But the way in which we approach that, and I've done this from like a standard work perspective, and I do this in terms of business outcomes perspective as well, is top-down approach in terms of what we're trying to achieve within a given shift, within a given week, a month, a quarter. That should be a tops-down approach in terms of establishing those goals. How we achieve those goals is a bottoms up. And so starting at the very base level of the business and working all the way up to your top goals, which are always output driven, you're going to get a clear understanding of what needs to be achieved in order to do that. And so with that, now you can tie who's working on what, when are they working on it, the exact RACI model that you're just talking about. But with that comes in a built-in escalation matrix as well to say like, what do I really need to know about the business in order for it to run? Like me as
Yeah.
the top leader, what do I actually have to know? And once you have that framework built in, the answer is very little, actually. Like there's very little from top to bottom that you
Yeah.
have to know in order to make sure that the actual daily business is running.
I think that the key thing people need to take away is that, the best people could be broken by just bad systems. And by setting
Absolutely.
it up with what you talked about, if you have good systems, so that your clarity and your outcomes, which I completely agree with you 1,000% there, because fundamentally, people are good. People want to do good work. They want to contribute and feel valued. And they want to go home to their families, have some fun, have some vacation. Like that 99.99% of people, right? And so
Absolutely.
I also feel that as business leaders and leaders of organizations and whatnot, the take I have on it is we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure our people are happy and contributing. Right. So I do what your CEO did is ask people, what are your triggers? What are my triggers? And if your things are going wrong, what's going wrong? Who needs to know? I don't want to know everything. I mean, I could be faulted for being sometimes maybe a little too empowering, because sometimes I'm just like, you can do that. Like I completely trust you. And so sometimes I find personally calibrating yourself to figure out what level to get what level to get involved in. But like you said, so they might make a decision a little differently than you. Chances of it like busting the business are pretty low because usually huge capital allocation, the big decisions will tend to go toward the executive team anyway. So at the end of the day, you just learn from it. And that's the cost of, the cost of a mistake is the learning to never repeat it. So we think about good systems. If people don't have, there's an escalation method. So people follow that, it also prevents it. And then also from a perspective of if there is some incorrect decision, well, that's a return that the business has in perpetuity to never make that sort of mistake again. People are sometimes quick to fire. It's like, well, hold on, it's like we just burnt $30,000 to make that mistake, like or fix something that the return on that is indefinite, right? So if you think of NPV, it's we just learned something. That was kind of a good thing, right? And that's the approach I try to take as well too. So, question in this piece here, you talked about a few things, but in your perspective, what do you think is one structural shift that leaders could make to immediately reduce the decision, the noise and decision fatigue that they may experience?
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit a few minutes ago, but I think define the right decisions. And so who needs to make what decision and when? I think doing that, starting from that perspective, immediately is going to bring clarity in terms of not only with each leader, but with their direct reports, and even below that on reducing the noise within the environment. You think about, like, if you don't know if you should be involved, then what are the odds if your team knows that you should be involved? And what are the odds if that they feel empowered to make a decision? And that's why I go down that's why I start with that tops down approach, right? With bottoms up standard work that lead to those outcomes. When you build structure like that, it's not about, you had mentioned before, like big government, in governing. It's really not about that. Actually, what it's really about is ownership and accountability, right? Like, I'm empowering you to make these decisions with a tremendous amount of autonomy, and you have my trust to go and do those things. And so that's like the ultimate empowerment. Now, from a leader's perspective, that's also accountability. Like, we agreed that you're going to do these things, and I'm going to measure you against your ability to execute those. And so there's building that trust throughout an organization. Like, I can't speak highly enough of running a business that way.
Yeah, I love that the trust and empowerment is critical. And like you said, you set the boundaries, which is great. So yeah, you touched on a bunch of those, and thanks for reinforcing that a little bit harder. So the next part we'll get into, kind of want to get around leadership and the cost of, sometimes the human cost of scale. Like, you've been through a journey, and what do you think leadership pressure does to energy, health, and family life if left unchecked? And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I thought we could maybe go a little deeper on that.
Yeah. It's a slow burn. That burnout accumulates very quietly. It's not like one day, you're sitting there saying, like, oh, I'm fully energized, like I'm ready to roll. And the next day you're like, boom, I'm just done. Right. It can feel like that because I call it, hitting a wall. Like, you literally just hit the wall and you're like, I'm done. And it feels almost instantaneous. But when you look back, that's just not the case. And I think it shows up in a bunch of different ways. I said it for myself: shortened patience, that constant sense of urgency, and your body, your mind, it never shuts off. And I think for those around you, it can be hard for them to visualize it because it just looks like, oh, like Brent's just this really committed person, right? Like the ultimate owner, and so much commitment.
Mhm.
But on the inside, you're kind of eroding. For me, I've hit the wall a number of times, and it takes a toll. It's taken a toll on me physically. I talked to you about this when we had originally met. I lost 60 pounds over the last few years because I refused to stop prioritizing my health and in the name of my work, and also realizing that me doing that enables me to actually work a lot better and more efficiently, as well as how I handle my family. And so those are, I'll stop right there for now, but those are just a few
Yeah,
of the signs for me.
no, for sure. And I remember, that's why I went down this road, because I vividly remember the 60 pounds in a few years. Earlier on, you said you worked for a 50-year-old business. Did you say at the time you were 50?
No, no, no. I wasn't
Okay.
I wasn't 50. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't think so, because you look like 27. So I'm like,
Yeah,
hang on a second, the
40.
50. I'm like, yeah, like it said, you literally look like you just walked off a college football field.
No, I,
Um,
I I appreciate that. No, I'm 40, and I can tell you right now, I look better at 40 than I did at 30, for
yeah.
sure. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. So it worked. Actually, a friend of mine is Connor Carrick. He used to play he's an NHL player. He used to play for Seattle. He's now playing in Europe. And one thing that struck with me, we had this conversation about 3 or 4 years ago, but he said, you can't outmind biology. And so, to your point, I would be guilty of just saying, no, mind over matter. And it's like, to an extent, that's true, but you can't beat biology, right? Like, we've got our human body is an unbelievable system, more sophisticated than AI. And somebody created it greater than us that is just like literally an incredible machine. However,
Mhm.
you cannot outmind, if you abuse this thing repeatedly, things will happen to your body will send you signals, i.e. dreaming, i.e. shortness, i.e. weight loss, weight gain. Some people get weight loss. They look gaunt and it's just very, very unhealthy. And I think it's really important that you can be a leader. How can people be successful and run large size businesses and have the health that you have? For example, like you look great, you feel great, your kid's a priority versus someone who might be double the size and suffering in all areas. Both Homo sapiens. And so one of the thoughts was like what I see, and it's sometimes people say that burnout, oh, it's a personal failure, but I think they should see it, and you alluded to it in how you run the company and prioritize your kid. It really is a systems failure. And so that's part of the conversation I want to have is drive burnout. It's okay. It's a sign that your body's telling you, but it's not a personal failure. The playbook that we've been taught has been wrong. And sometimes we have to pay a personal
Yeah.
price to realize, oh shit, there's a better way I can do this, right?
Yeah. So are you asking like what's my
Oh,
personal system? How do I look at it?
yeah. What's your personal system and like um, how did you transform yourself, if you will, to kind of create those shuffles?
Yeah, I mean, it took me a really long time, and so I just told you I'm 40 and I just figured this out, in the last couple of years. And even then, like I'm still going to get burnt out occasionally, right? But it's how I handle it, how I
Sure.
recover from it that's changed. There was a time when I worked at Amazon, and Amazon has holiday peak season, really from kind of we say Black Friday to like Christmas Eve or so, but really it starts in the weeks leading up to that. And every year that I worked at Amazon, I could go just gangbusters on what we needed to do and ensure that we had a great peak season and my team was going to be successful. I would usually try to work almost every day. Towards the end, I actually started moving in some days off. Just talking about systems approach, like we were doing, like I actually had to be there. I didn't have to be there. It's just not true. But
Yeah.
I guarantee you, by December 26th, I would be sicker than a dog. Be
Wow.
completely healthy. Everything would be fine from Thanksgiving to Christmas. By the day after Christmas, and the weight's off my shoulder, guarantee you I would have some sort of flu or unbelievably sick. You could set your watch to it every year. My wife knew it was coming. And
Mhm.
so, the things I started to learn from that is where do I, one, get my energy and recharge? And a lot of that is time by myself, actually being able to reflect. Two, like where does my passion lie, like outside of work, which is definitely like in sports and physical activity and being with my children and that sort of thing. So I have dedicated time, in the morning that I really focus on myself. Like most people know that I'm a guy who likes to get up at 5 a.m. I like to do like a sauna and a cold shower and maybe some light workout. I spend breakfast with my family, and then I'm committed to work. I'm committed to work until the work gets over, or until it's time for dinner, and then I'm gonna shut things down. I'm gonna focus on my family, and people know if something's wrong. Like when my kids go to bed, I'll get right back in it. Like I have absolutely no problem with that. And that's a virtual life, and that's a little bit different. When I used to show up on
Yeah.
on site at places, I also had a rule where it was like 3 o'clock on a Friday, like I'm out. I don't care what's going on. My team's going to have control of it. If I've got to come back at 5 a.m. on Saturday to make sure it's done, like I'm going to do that. But I want to get out of the building at 3 o'clock, and be there when my kids get off the bus. And so it's like setting those boundaries and understanding like when I'm going to have time to refresh that battery is absolutely critical to me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that because it's something that I see, and I part of this podcast is to get the message out that these things can happen to you and you not know it, and then you get sick or burn out, or it'll affect relationships to your life. And just like it happened to you over a period of time, it takes a period of time to, believe me, I tried going to the gym once and getting a six pack, it didn't work, right? So it takes time for the effects to happen and it takes time to unwind it. But the compounding effects of the positive of it is exponential. And I've seen that shift in myself as well too. So, I'm 48 next week and I still feel and act like a 17-year-old. My body sometimes wakes up in the morning and says, hold on a second, cowboy, you're not that young. But I still feel, some friends like I just do lots of stuff, and sometimes people will look at it and I'm like, well, no, I do what you talked about. I sort of try to set my boundaries. I'm there for the kids. If I have to get up earlier, I'll get up earlier. I still play hockey, skiing, anything to move, any excuse to be outside. Love fishing. So I'm a type A sort of ENTJ, sort of, one of the kind of crazy maniacs sometimes. I'm like just so intense. But then drop me with a fishing rod in the middle of a river in a mountain somewhere. I'm just like, I'm in God's land. Like that's totally my happy
Yeah.
place. So I think to your point, the message to the audience is find those pieces. That might be my stuff, that might be your stuff, but there'll be something for someone else, right? So I just always laugh when people say, no, you have to do this specific routine. And just, I'm like, well, we're all different. We can take pieces of that routine that we like. But it just the point is take time for yourself, take time for your social, commit to work, commit to all aspects of your life. Commit to
Yeah.
your spiritual side, commit to your work side, your family side, your buddies. Like I go do a trip a couple times a year. These are the battery rechargers that I find talk a lot to leaders. They're not doing. They I don't know. This narrative I'm trying to change.
No, I think so for sure. People historically have given like Jeff Bezos, for example, a really hard time because he very publicly says that work-life balance doesn't exist. And Amazon and their culture definitely takes some of that to an extreme. But what he actually meant, when you look at when he actually talks about work-life balance, is that inherently by saying work-life balance, you're whether you view it as like the scales of justice, or maybe like a teeter-totter. You're basically saying like I'm gonna try to make it go like this. When in all reality, if something bad is happening at work, that's gonna weigh it down. And now I'm up here in my personal life, and same with personal life, right? Like something goes wrong. You've talked about your family who's gotten sick before. You yourself have gotten sick before. All of a sudden, that's going to weigh it down. And guess what happens to my work life? And so he really has referenced it as circular, and because it's one singular life, and how do you manage that whole thing, and for me, that becomes clear priorities. I want very predictable rhythms, both within my work life and my personal life, even though that's not always possible, right? But like I want to know what's happening, when's it happening, and what do I need to contribute. I want a team around me that's going to help enable that, and I'm going to enable them to have that same sort of practice. And then I want time for thinking. And honestly, like I think the biggest takeaway for anyone listening is you also need to surround yourself with a peer group and a leaders around you that prioritize those things as well. They don't have to go
Mhm.
fishing, to get re-energized, but they do have to support the idea of like, hey, no, you need this
Something.
time and focus on yourself, yeah, and that. We talked about the call with my daughters that I prioritize. I had a boss not too long ago when I had just gotten promoted, and just got on to his team, and I got called to San Francisco, and I told him like so it was like 5:30 in San Francisco, and I told him like throughout the day, like, hey, when my daughter calls, I'm going to go do it. And so it was like 5:30, so it was 7:30 in Iowa, and she's calling. I was like, hey, can we take a quick break? I'm going to go do this. And he's like, oh, I thought you were kidding. I was like, nope, nope, not kidding. Daughter's gonna go to bed, and I'm gonna, I read to her. I usually actually brought a book with me, and we would FaceTime, and I would read to her. I was like, I'm gonna go into a phone booth that we had in the office. I'm gonna go do that. And he's like, don't let my wife hear that you're doing that. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, and everyone else is kind of like, yeah, like what? And I'm like, yeah. I knew I was in the wrong place. Like it was very
Yeah.
obvious that I was in the wrong place. And so when I joined Lob, when I was getting recruited by Lob, the first call that I had was actually with my future boss, and I asked him that question. I was like, "Hey," and we were happened to be based in San Francisco as well. It's like, you fly me into San Francisco to meet with whoever. It's like it's 5:30 in the afternoon, 7:30 my time. My daughter goes to bed at 7:30, and I say I'm going to walk out for 15 minutes. I was like, and we have a board presentation or something tomorrow. I was like, how do you respond to that? He's like, there's nothing more important. He's like, you go do that. He's like, you'll be a better version of yourself when you get back.
Yeah,
Like that blows your mind. Like you got to
blows your
surround
mind.
yourself by leaders that believe in the same things that you do.
Yeah, I kind of got goosebumps when you said it because I believe in that. And you don't have to answer because you just did. So I'm going to reverse engineer. So for those that listen, that was my last question to Brent was going to be, if you can give one piece of advice to a leader in the middle of chaos right now, what would it be? And you kind of touched
Yeah.
on it, right? You totally did just now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you definitely have to rely on who you are. But I think the simplest thing is never ask yourself like, how do I survive this? I think that's what you want to avoid. Um, you need to be able to answer that question to formulate kind of a short-term plan, but you also need to ask yourself, what must change in my life so this doesn't happen again? And that's not just like when you're hitting a wall or in burnout or anything. That's really just in business in general. Like your ability to reflect on the things happening around you that you don't like and to say, what do we need to do to have this not happen again? Is going to change the course of your business. I just had this conversation yesterday with our CRO, and he had given me a compliment, which I had really appreciated. Which he's like, you don't say no a lot. And I was like, I try to say it like very rarely, actually. Like really force my teams to do because they know if we're in a meeting, a brainstorm session, like I really don't want to hear it about like no, can't do it or whatever. What I want to focus on is what needs to be true in order for this to happen. Then we can plot out like no, can't do it,
Ah,
won't do it, or whatever. But at least we have our reasons. And if something changes in the future, now we know, take that off the list. We can actually go execute that now because that's no longer a barrier for us. It's the same thing mentally on how we're handling ourselves.
I love the fact you said what needs to be true. I think that's a question that I use the same thing actually. Um, and it's so empowering because it allows you to come up with options and figure out, okay, what needs to be true for this not to happen again. It's a little bit of homage to the inversion thinking. Who was Warren Buffett? Oh, Charlie Munger. He said, "How do
Hmm.
I how do I blow this up?" And you start thinking, what are all the ways I can screw this up? It's kind of the reverse of the thing because you start thinking
Yeah.
about it's about deconstructing how to make this happen and yeah, what needs to be true. And hey, for something to be true are just not possible. Don't have technology, capital resources. But to your point, smartly said, you now articulating the reasons or you've documented why yes or no. And if things change, you can go back and say, well, the condition for that to be true have now occurred.
Yeah.
So, that innovation pipeline, whatever that project can kind of happen. So this was great. I really appreciate your time. So many nugget bombs of wisdom in this one. So this has been epic. I really appreciate you sharing your leadership and your time with us here today. And thanks for making time. That's the most precious resource. And appreciate you spending with me and our audience and those that hear on YouTube, podcast, and LinkedIn. So thank you, my friend.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.